Do you struggle to make your watercolor subjects appear more three-dimensional? Today, I'll show you how to give your paintings depth and interest by focusing on an easy way to make shadows. You'll learn how to create a beautiful spherical crespidea, making it look round and realistic, not just a flat yellow circle. You'll need watercolor paper, and I recommend cold press if you're a beginner. Watercolor paint, such as this warm raw sienna, yellow ochre, something along those lines, and a touch of a darker brown, as well as green. And a premixed green is totally fine here. Let's keep it simple today. You also need round watercolor brushes, like a medium and a small one, and a jar of water and a dropper bottle for clean water, and of course, last but not least, a rag. Let's start by getting our paints ready. So with watercolor, we typically work from lights to darks. In other words, more diluted paint first, followed by paint mixes with less water and more pigment. For the first layer, let's start with a warm yellow like this raw sienna or yellow ochre. I'm mixing a good amount of water with my yellow to create a light flowing puddle of paint. This light mixture will be our brightest highlight on the crespidea where the light is hitting the top of the flower. Check out how it moves around on my palette. When I run my brush through the puddle, it immediately fills in the brush strokes. I can also test it on a scrap piece of watercolor paper and see that it's fairly light. You also want to make sure you have a big enough puddle of paint to create the size of the flower head that you want. It is a total pain in the butt to stop in the middle of your practice and mix up more paint, so just do it all at once. So with that bigger brush, create a circle for the crespidea head. I'm going to leave room for a few others in here. We're going to wait just a moment while the paint soaks into the paper. Meanwhile, add a bit more of that raw sienna, or if you're using yellow ochre, similar color, to your paint puddle over here. I'm trying to make this paint puddle more saturated than the layer that I just put down. Now this is a pretty wet puddle still. I can tell because it's shiny when I move my paper around and try to catch the light. What we're looking for the next step is for that shiny puddle to turn into a satin sheen. I'm going to test this, and it does look more saturated. It's darker in value than the one that we just put on without adding any other colors to it. I see on my paper that this is soaking in. It's still a little bit shiny. Should be good soon. While the paper is still damp and it's turned that satin sheen color, drop in that more saturated pigment that you just mixed up. We're going to follow the shape of this crespidea and make like a crescent shape, like a fat moon on the lower part of the shape. Now that the paint has soaked into the paper a little bit more, I can take my paper and move it around in the light, and it's not as glossy as it was before. That is an ideal time for our next step. I'm going to take a little bit of brown. I don't need quite as much because this is just going to be the deepest shadowy area on the underside of this sphere. And I'm going to drop that in on the lower part of this crescent, making a skinnier sort of crescent. Okay, I'm just going to let that flow and do its thing. I'm not going to touch it. Now I'm going to take my smaller brush and get a bit of that same brown. I'm going to make a few drops close to the bottom of that sphere. And I'm going to start to scatter those drops the farther up I go. I'm going to kind of leave this top area, but that will give it a little bit of a textured look. So you want to do all that quickly while the paper is still damp for those smooth shadow transitions. If your paper has started to dry, you'll get hard edges, which we really don't want if we're going for a soft, shadowy transition from dark to lighter areas. If your paper has dried at this point where it looks matte and it doesn't look satin, wait until the paper feels like room temperature to the back of your hand. If it's cool to the touch, then it's still wet. But if it's room temperature, you can add a layer of water, clear water, and wait for the paper to absorb it. It should turn from that shiny glossy to a satin sheen in appearance before you do the next step. Now let's do the stem. For the stem, I'm using a premixed green for ease. This is Sap Green by M. Graham. This is one of the few times I would use a premixed green like this, especially Sap Green, which doesn't really play pretty with other colors. But we don't have to make this complicated because we're just practicing. We're going to have long stems like that. Now see how quickly I'm moving my brush? Try to have confidence when you do this. And you don't have to make them perfectly straight. Look, this is not perfectly straight. Nothing in nature is perfect. So don't aim for perfection here. I'm drawing that green out onto my palette area to make sure there's no paint boogers. Now I'm going to rotate my paper just a smidge so that it's a little easier for my hand. I do think that looks a little bit skinny, so I'm going to go in and add to it. I might regret this. All right, that's not bad. Let's do another one. Check it out, a Crispadia that looks way more interesting than just a flat yellow circle. Notice how just a few layers of those progressively darker yellows and browns, this Crispadia has a lot more life. You can make a whole bunch of these on the same page to practice the technique. Just pay attention to your water to paint ratios and the dampness level of your paper, and you'll get the hang of watercolor in no time.